Great. I want you all to think back to the class period when Dr. Rubacher asked us to take a vote on whether or not we wanted to move our class to Chambers on Tuesdays in addition to Thursdays.
I remember that.
Now, I don't know about you, but I was sitting there really hoping that everyone would say no because Chambers is pretty far and I did not have to want to walk there twice a week, in addition to the once a week we already had to go there. So, luckily enough, all 24 of the kids in our class voted no. Now, how would you have felt if Dr. Rubacher decided that as the most educated, most powerful person in the room, her vote was more qualified, she was in a better position to make the decision, and she thought it would be better to move class, so she just outvoted all of us? I would feel somewhat powerless. Now, take that feeling and picture a situation where the vote was much closer, where say 13 of us voted no, and 11 of us voted yes. I would be pretty relieved. I would say, okay, it's a good thing we took this vote. Everyone voted no by a slim margin. I'm glad we did this. But again, Dr. Rubacher decides, as the more powerful, educated person, she's going to outvote us and decide to move class. I would have been sitting there, maybe thinking some pretty sarcastic thoughts about this little election we had, wondering why did we take this election to begin with? What was the point of taking this vote if she was going to decide against our decisions anyway? So this system is somewhat reminiscent of our electoral college, whereby it is possible to elect a president who does not have the popular vote of the people. And not only does the system take away the will of the people, but it also unfairly distributes votes. Another example of this would be to look at the class with, that is supposed to be pink, to look at our class, and if Dr. Rubacher decides that the boys in the class, the 6 boys, do not have a big enough say in what goes on, and there's simply no way they can get their way because there aren't enough of them. So she decides to change things so that the boys each get 2 votes for every 1 vote that the girls get. If this were the case, then 25% of the class would have 40% of the vote. And again, this is somewhat similar to what happens in the United States because small states end up with a greater proportion of votes than they technically should have. And what happens is you get something like this, where 3 votes in Texas are equal to 1 vote in Vermont, and 4 votes in California are equal to 1 vote in Wyoming. And to me, this is unfair, and not only that, but it's kind of reminds me of the 3/5 rule, where in the past, 5 African Americans would only count as 3 people. So in this way, 4 Californians are only getting the vote of 1 Wyominger. And that seems pretty unfair. And the way the system works is that, technically, if a president appealed to all of the states in which people's votes counted for more than a vote, he could win the Electoral College with a little more than 50% and only have 22% of the popular vote. And if this were the case, we would have a president who 78% of the population voted against. With our class example, that would be like giving all of the voting power to the guys. So all of the girls could vote against something and the guys could vote for it and they would win. And with this system, although it's unlikely for something that extreme to happen, it has happened 3 times in the past that a president has been elected with less than the popular vote. And though these 3 elections don't seem like a lot, it accounts for approximately 5% of the elections that have happened in our history. So we have to ask ourselves, are we okay with a system that fails to elect the president with the popular vote 5% of the time? Are we okay with having a 5% failure? If your favorite sport, by some fluke of the rules, made it so that the losing team could win 5% of the time, would you still watch it? Would you jump out of an airplane if parachutes failed 5% of the time? When this system was created, it was made so that in a time where information traveled slowly and people couldn't access all the information they may have needed to make an educated vote, there were people who knew more, who could make the smartest decision. Today, information is accessible at our fingertips. We can find out just about any information about any candidate simply by pulling out our phone or going on a computer. So we have to ask ourselves if this system is outdated. Are we educated enough to take matters into our own hands and vote for ourselves so that we can each have an equal say in the election? Most of you are probably thinking yes, and more everyday Americans are saying yes to the same question. We've come to a time where there's been a shift in sentiment and people are not really in favor of the Electoral College anymore. And the only thing it's really come to is a need for reform. In the past, we amended the Constitution to eliminate the 3/5 rule, to make it so that every African American person was equal to one white person, and every person was equal. And it's come to the time where in our system of the election, we need to make it so that each person's vote is equal to every other person's vote. So the time has come to call for this reform so that everyone can have an equal say in our government and in the elections. Thank you.
All right.